Thank you everybody so much for joining for this discussion. Love to be able to do it live as I did as often as I could before all of this started. But I'm glad we have this technology that gives us a second best way of getting together. And at least this way, we still get to see each other's faces, and I'm happy to note, just looking on the front screen, I'm not the only one on this call who needs a haircut, but we are all we're all in this together, right? So we meet at a very difficult time for our community and for our country. Obviously, New Jersey is, in fact, per capita, the hardest hit state in the country. We've lost over 9,000 people, and that's just the official statistic. The true number is undoubtedly significantly higher because we don't have universal testing. But through tremendous collective effort, all of us together, working together, we have achieved hard-fought success in bending the curve of this infection in our state. It's getting worse in a lot of parts of America. It is not getting worse in New Jersey. It is getting better. And I look at numbers, I look at data, I look at facts. And what I see tells me that we hit our peak around the middle of April, because at that point we had only about 100 empty critical care and intensive care beds in the entire state of New Jersey. That's how close we were to breaking the public health system in our state. But we turned it around. Now we've gone from a peak of about 8,000 hospitalizations down to about 4,000 since then. From about 1,600 people on ventilators to about 900 today, about 2,000 critical intensive care patients down to around 1,250 today. And fingers crossed, with continued hard work, we can get there. And, this is partly because of some decisions that our leadership took, but really most of all, it is because we, the people of New Jersey, we, the American people, decided that we were going to accept very significant personal sacrifices to save the lives of our loved ones, our neighbors, fellow members of our community, and most of all, to ease some of the burden on the doctors and the nurses, the frontline heroes who have been saving lives in those hospitals. So as hard as this has been and continues to be, let's not forget that this has been worth it if we care about human life, as I know every single one of us on this call does. Now, a big part of the cost has been the economic cost. People have lost their jobs. Small businesses have had to shut down. Large businesses have had to shut down. Not because of any natural thing that happened in the economy, but because the government said, and all of us together said, we've got to do this to save lives. And so one of our priorities in the Congress, and certainly for me, over the last 2 or 3 months, has been to try to make that easier for people, to ease the economic burden of doing the right thing from a public health point of view. And we've passed now several major pieces of legislation to provide relief to the American people and to small businesses. Some of that stuff is beginning to work. None of it is working perfectly, and we've had some significant frustrations along the way. Anybody who has tried to benefit from unemployment insurance in New Jersey and around the country knows that that system pretty much broke down at the beginning because so many people were applying for unemployment at the same time. It's now getting better. My staff have been working with a lot of people in our district to try to make sure that they get their money, and in the last that it is coming through. We're not yet where we need to be, though, and we continue to work hard on that. The small business loan program, there were tremendous problems at the very beginning. I think we all read about how the banks, which were supposed to be channeling this money to our small businesses, in fact, were placing their favored larger existing customers at the head of the line, and the mom and pop shops that didn't have those established relationships with the big banks were sent to the back of the line. And a lot of them didn't get anything when the money all ran out for the first round. So when we were asked to provide more money for a second round of funding, a bunch of us said, wait a second, we got to fix this first so that it works correctly. We provided a lot more money and set aside a very large share of it for smaller community-based banks, credit unions, for institutions that have a history, a track record of working with the smaller businesses in our community. And sure enough, in the second round, things, again, not perfect, but they've gone a lot better. Just to give you some idea of it, in New Jersey, in the first round, we got a little over 30,000 of those small business loans. We're up to 90,000 already in the second round. The average loan size was well over $200,000 in the first round. It is just over $70,000 in this round, which indicates that this time the loans do tend to be going not to the Los Angeles Lakers, not to the steakhouse chains, but to the mom and pop businesses that needed the help the most. And again, we continue to work to try to make that better, because I would acknowledge it is not perfect yet. As I mentioned, my staff is working around the clock to try to help our constituents. My legislative staff in Washington is working most of their time on constituent cases, because we have so many people. We've had over 1,000 people come to us with individual needs. And our commitment is, if anybody in our district needs help, we will get back to them. You will get a human being who will call you back, who will do their very best. If you are eligible for this assistance that we have approved, you will get it. That is the promise that Congress made, and we will work our hearts out to make sure that you get it. We are close to overwhelmed, but not quite, and we will keep on working until the last I is dotted and the last T is crossed. Now, that's the legislation we passed so far. I think we need to do a lot more, and as many of you know, we are working on another major bill in the House of Representatives right now. One of my top priorities in that bill is to make sure we get some relief for our state and local governments around the country. And here in New Jersey, we need it desperately. Every single small town in my district has to balance its budget. Every single one of them has to keep on paying cops and firefighters and teachers and people who take care of our parks and the utilities and the garbage, and who run the summer programs and the sports leagues and everything else that makes small town life in New Jersey good. And revenues are completely dried up. That's true for the state as well. If we're not driving, we're not buying gasoline, we're not paying gas tax. People are getting, are getting to pay their property taxes later. A lot of businesses are just not going to be paying taxes at all because they're shut down. And so there's no way we're going to be able to maintain the same level of services, but just to maintain a minimum level of service, it's essential that we get some relief from the federal government. I'm one of the 4 lead sponsors in the House of a bill that does that. We're now up to 149 Republican and Democratic sponsors to provide relief to communities, counties, and states of all sizes, no matter how small. And that principle will be reflected. That bill, what we're trying to do, will be reflected in the much larger bill that we are going to unveil this week in the House of Representatives and vote on and pass in the next few days. So I've had success in getting that through the House, at least, with a lot of help, by the way, from our local officials in our district. About 54 of our mayors and county freeholders, pretty evenly divided among Republicans and Democrats, wrote a letter to our congressional leadership saying, pass this bill that I introduced and bring that relief to our communities. So we're going to fight for that. We're talking about a lot of other things. The post office needs help. We don't want to see the post office go under at a moment when we need it the most. We're talking about how to make sure everybody can vote safely in November, no matter what the state of the epidemic is at that point. And perhaps most important, we're talking about testing and contact tracing, the public health response that's needed, make sure we can come out of this and go back to our normal lives. And here, you know, I always want to level with you guys. This is where I'm most frustrated. The whole point, we had a strategy to deal with this, to defeat this epidemic. And that strategy was basically that our state governments would shut things down for a while and force social distancing to try to slow down the spread of this disease, number one. Number two, the Congress would provide a lot of money, a lot of relief to buy us time as people had to stay home and businesses had to shut down, to buy us time for a public health strategy of testing and contact tracing so that we could know who in our society is infectious, who needs to continue to stay home, and who can safely go back to work and back to school. And number three, the president and the White House was supposed to mobilize the country, including private industry, to give us that testing and tracing strategy. Number one and number two, not fully done, but we did have the lockdowns. Congress has provided a lot of relief. We've done a lot of what we said we were going to do. Number three has absolutely not happened. And right now, the message we're getting consistently from the White House is not going to do it. It's too hard. It's too much work. You all just go back to work. You all go back to school. Start up your economies anyway. We're just not going to do our part. And what makes it particularly infuriating is that even as they're saying that, every single goddamn person who works at the White House is being tested every single day so that they can work safely, even as they're saying, we've got to go back to work without that kind of testing strategy. That makes me really angry. Now, the reality is I can't change that. Congress will continue to provide the money. We will do everything we possibly can, and the rest is going to be on us here in New Jersey and in states around the country. Tomorrow, I believe Governor Murphy is going to unveil our state testing and contact tracing strategy. I've been talking to him and to his team just about every day the last week about that, and I think we're going to be trying to do the right things. Again, there'll be financial support from Washington. I wish there were more leadership support so that all the states, all the different parts of this country could be working together. It's an incredibly important moment right now. I don't think any of these issues are partisan in our communities. When I talk to local officials, I don't even know what party they're in anymore. We're just talking about the same stuff. How to save our small businesses, how to save our small towns, how to save the lives of our seniors living in nursing homes, how to make sure that we can be healthy and well and restore our economy in a sustainable way without having to go through this again and again and again. I think we've done a lot of the right things in New Jersey. We're trying to do the right things in the Congress. I'm going to keep on working my heart out until we get to the point where we need to be. So with that, I would be delighted to hear any of your thoughts and your questions in the time that we have. And we'll try to get through as much as we can and then get back to folks later if there's still more to be done. Thank you very, very much. DeAndre, take it away.
Can you hear me, Tom?
I can, yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on right then. Just a reminder for everyone on the call, if you have a question at any point throughout this conversation, please just use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name, the town you're from, and contact information. That is very important. If we don't get to your question here on the call, we can follow up offline. Additionally, if there's additional follow-up from your question or a specific situation, we can also follow up as well. And a reminder for everyone that this call is being recorded for distribution purposes. So if you'd like to turn off your camera, you may do that at any point during the call as well. Tom, your first question is, how best can we support local businesses during this epidemic, especially if the virus continues to threaten the community for many more months?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'll tell you what I think the government should be doing, and then we can talk about what we can do as individuals. We set up this PPP, this Paycheck Protection Program, for our small businesses, and it's a great idea on paper, that every small business should be able to get a loan to cover their payroll and to help with things like rent and mortgage payments, and that they should get that loan forgiven 100% if they manage to keep their employees on payroll through this period. I talked a little bit about some of the problems that we've been trying to solve. It's not perfect, it's beginning to work a little bit better. My view is that we should either extend that with some fixes or replace it with something significantly better. And there's a bill which I co-sponsored today, which would replace the PPP with a program that's similar to what a lot of European countries have done. And that is basically where in our case, the IRS, the tax agency, which has all the information that it needs on employers around the country, how many employees they have, earnings, et cetera, basically provides direct support to those companies and their employees, again, through the IRS, through the tax system, so long as the company can demonstrate that it has suffered significant economic losses as a result of the coronavirus. So no need to go through banks, no need to go through loan applications. The IRS already has most of their information. And if they falsely attest to their how much they've lost, the IRS will know that because it'll know their earnings next year, and then they'll have to repay the money. That strikes me as a simpler, more straightforward system. It avoids all the problems at the banks, and honestly, it would also, it would not it would be easier to catch out or not provide support to companies that are still doing okay, and some companies are still doing okay as a result of the crisis. So one way or another, I think we need to be willing to extend this. As I mentioned, we're hearing the message from the White House is we're not really interested right now in passing any more legislation or in signing any more legislation. We want to see how this plays out. It feels to me as if they're just trying to hold out to pressure us to reopen our economy, even though it's not safe to do so. I wish they would focus on helping us reopen our economy by making it safe to do so. And then what can we do individually? I think, a great thing to do for our local restaurants in particular is to buy gift cards. Obviously, you can get takeout. That's one way to help them. But if you can, a way to front load it is to get gift cards, which we then can redeem hopefully soon when we can go out to eat at our favorite place again. But you're paying them now and redeeming it later. There's a website that we can send anybody who's interested.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question, you've hit this a little bit in your opening remarks, but what is being done to help stimulate municipalities of all different sizes directly, including government assistance or the use of PPP loans? What could stimulate municipalities?
Yeah. So, by the way, the bill that I just mentioned would also cover, it would cover all entities, not just small businesses. Larger businesses, also municipal government entities. So it would help in that respect. But for now, the main relief that we are looking for is simply direct grants from the federal government to our state, local, and county governments. In the first CARES Act, in the first of the very large bills that we passed, we did actually provide $150 billion for this purpose, which sounds like a huge amount of money. The problem is that it was severely restricted in terms of how it could be used. It can only be used to pay for direct COVID-19 related expenditures by states and local governments. So like if they buy masks for state police, they can use it for that. But it cannot be used to make up for revenues lost to COVID-19, which is the main problem, that tax revenues are just not coming in because we shut down the economy. And number two, it only goes to states, but to cities only if their population is over 500,000. We have exactly 0 cities with a population over 500,000 in the state of New Jersey. Many of our counties are not that large. No municipality in my district, or well, anywhere in the state, got funding as a result of that. So most of that $150 billion probably can't be spent. So we're trying to fix that in the bill that we are going to be voting on in the House in the next few days. Thanks. DeAndre? Can you hear us?
Hey, Tom, it's Colston. DeAndre is having connectivity issues because his phone went out. So I've got a couple. We're going to take one more FAQ because I have that list in front of me. He's the one with access to the group chat. So hopefully by the time you're answering this question, he will be back on and we can start the live chat.
Okay.
So one more question. We saw quite a bit in the questions that were submitted ahead of time. Why can't we make real progress on testing?
Ooh, that's a big question. Part of the answer is we got a late start. It's like any complicated big task. The sooner you start, the sooner you finish. And there were countries, most notably South Korea, that started on this the moment they saw their first coronavirus case. We got our first case the same day as South Korea. The first thing they did was to ramp up testing. And in our case, our national government, the executive branch just did not make an effort to do so. And so the states were left on their own. So that's number one. We're now ramping up, right? But we're late. Number two, if you do it early, the challenge is smaller because there are fewer people to test. Right now, we're testing a larger share of our population than South Korea. So it kind of looks good, but we also have more cases than any country in the world. The countries that did testing early managed to bend their curve at a much lower point than the United States. And so they didn't have to do as much testing to get to the results, the effects that they wanted to have. And then number three, there's a supply chain problem because testing, there are a lot of different inputs that go into conducting a test. You need to develop the test itself. You need a kit that has the collection equipment, maybe a nasal swab, a vial, all the other things. You need people who are collecting the test to have the protective equipment they need to protect themselves, masks, gloves, gowns. Then you need capacity in labs to run the tests. You need chemical reagents in many cases to be able to run the tests. And a shortage of any one of those things means that you can't do what you want to do. And we had a shortage in all of those things because we didn't bulk order the PPE protective equipment back in January, when the Department of Health and Human Services and other experts at the CDC and in our government were screaming, please, let's start doing this. The president did not, and to this day still has not fully used his authority under the Defense Production Act, the law that allows him to order private companies to produce things that are needed in a crisis, to stimulate, to require the production. And then finally, because he's left it to the states to do this on our own, all the different states are in competition with each other, and sometimes towns and counties within states are in competition with each other, scrounging for the same stuff, rather than having a single national plan that determines how much we need, where it needs to go, based on who needs it the most. So I think those are the answers for you. The good news is that, well, time has passed and we're an ingenious country, and there are a lot of new testing methodologies being developed that are better than the ones we had a week ago, 3 weeks ago. Rutgers University has developed one of the most useful tests in the country. It's a saliva test, just a couple of, which means you just spit out saliva into a vial, very easy to do. You don't need all the protective equipment. In fact, the FDA just approved this Rutgers test for home use. If you have a doctor or an expert through telemedicine walking you through it, you'll soon be able to do it at home. Tomorrow, watch Governor Murphy's announcement. I think he tends to under-promise and over-deliver. So some of the details may not be in the statement that he makes, but I think we're looking at many, many more community testing locations throughout the state of New Jersey over the next 5 to 6 weeks, with the capacity to do thousands and thousands and thousands of more tests a day. And my job is to try to make sure that we get the resources from the federal government to make that work.
Thank you, Tom. Sorry for anyone for the technical difficulties on my end. I do have a list still running of all the live questions. If I did miss your question in between the technical difficulties I was having, if you hear about 3 or 4 questions going, you're not up next, you don't see a message from myself, please just resubmit your question or just flag me again in the chat feature. Up first, our first question comes from Christy. Christy, can you hear us?
Yes. Oh.
We can hear
yes,
you.
I can.
Hi, Christy.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi. Representative Malinowski, I think you're doing an incredible job. You're so smart and so gracious, and I appreciate what you're doing. I work for an environmental nonprofit, and I have a lot of environmental concerns, but my main concern I'm going to ask you about today is a totally different thing. I'm concerned about funding for the U.S. Postal Service, and you mentioned that in your introduction. We need them. I'm concerned they are going, if they're not funded, how are we going to vote by mail? Given that we're expecting another surge in COVID infections, potentially in the fall. I really want to know what's going on with that, and I'm extremely worried about that issue.
Yeah, thank you so much. You hit the nail on the head. We always need the post office. We need them more today than ever because we're at home and depending on deliveries. And you can't have an election in America without the post office, even under normal times, because a lot of people vote by mail under normal circumstances. We have several states in America where everybody votes by mail. And so it has to be funded. Another thing, a lot of folks don't know this, but the post office doesn't get a penny, does not depend on taxpayer subsidies. The mail service that it runs pays for itself. It's pretty well run. The reason that the post office is in financial difficulty is because they were saddled with a requirement by Congress, by us, in the mid-2000s to prepay their pension obligations for their employees 50 years in advance. No big company has to do that, but for some reason that Congress decided it was going to saddle the post office with that burden. So that's the problem that we've got to solve. This, for some reason, got a little partisan in Washington the last few weeks. Again, I don't think it's partisan in our district or among regular people anywhere in America. And I think a lot of members of both parties have been hearing from their constituents about this, and I think we're going to come to some solution. You know, I cannot imagine the Congress of the United States allowing the post office to go under at a moment like this. But keep talking about it, keep asking me about it, and obviously, you know, you're talking to your representative, but if you have friends and loved ones elsewhere in the country, encourage them to do the same thing, and we'll get this done.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Joan. Joan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Let me just get it up here. Okay. I was just thinking, though, about the last question and wondering how the Trump administration will sabotage any money you try to give to the post office, but I'll try to put that aside. I had two questions. One is, why were the banks allowed to charge fees for the business loans? Because I don't think they were at risk for anything, since the money comes from our government tax dollars. So why did the banks get to make money off of that?
Yeah, they weren't risking anything. Because we were guaranteeing the loans.
Right. How did it happen that they got money?
Yeah. So I think the idea was that, I mean, we were asking them to use their employees and a tremendous number of employee hours to implement this program on behalf of the U.S. government. That it was fair to allow them to charge a small administrative fee basically to perform that service for us. I was okay with that concept. I think if you look at the fee structure, there was a little bit of an incentive within it, and that's on us, to process more of the large loans than the small loans at the beginning. And that's something that I would still like to fix if we have a chance to do it in another bill. As I mentioned, we have put a lot of pressure on the banks to get their act in order, and both through setting aside money for smaller banks that I think do this better, and a lot of pressure and shaming of the big banks. We're now getting a lot of the smaller loans out. The performance is better right now, so I'm a little less frantic than I would have been on this amount.
Given us the service for free, being as we bailed them out in 2008 and did not ask for anything back.
Well, they did pay back. They did pay us back for the bailout money back then, and that's the case as well with the assistance program we created for large businesses in the CARES Act. They got to pay us back. Those are not forgivable. So, I think you raise a very good point, and I would, if it were up to me, and it is 1 out of 435 up to me, because I'm one in Congress who fights hard for stuff. I would like to fiddle with that fee structure so that there's a stronger incentive, even than now, to work with the smaller clients, with people who are not regular bank customers. That I totally agree with.
Okay, I had another question before this one, which was, how hopeful are you that we can get back our democracy and get rid of the oligarchy that we now have? Because for sure, this newest behavior over the positive COVID-19 tests in the White House staff is so reminiscent of a king who would behead anyone who dislikes or brings trouble to him.
Yeah.
Like him to the COVID, although he doesn't wear a mask or anything.
Well, it's an old principle that even in a democracy, you can do whatever you want if people let you.
Yeah, right.
It's up to us, right? If you're outraged by something that's happening, we still have as much power today as we ever did, we the people, to vote for people who vote for representatives and presidents and governors who reflect our values and our priorities. And yeah, there are some problems in our election system and in our system for financing elections. As you guys may know, I don't take a single penny in my campaigns from corporate PACs. I was a main champion of the first bill that we introduced in the House of Representatives when we got there in 2018 to reform our campaign finance system, to get some of the corruption out of our politics, to deal with partisan gerrymandering, and all the obstacles to Americans voting. Now the obstacle is they're telling us we have to risk our lives potentially to vote. So we got to deal with that stuff. But if you're angry about it, vote, organize, get your friends to vote, whatever your point of view, whether you agree with mine or not, it's the same answer. And I'm confident that as unhappy as I am about a lot that's going on in our country, I'm confident that the American people are more involved in our civic life and our political life today than at any point in my memory. And that makes me optimistic.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Jerry. Jerry, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jerry.
Hi there. My question is sort of on behalf of a lot of things that I hear from people I know, which is there's a feeling I hear, I don't share it, but I hear it a lot, of the idea that the New Jersey lockdown is really excessive and overblown, and people need their freedoms back, much more quickly. I just wonder, first of all, how you would respond to that, and sort of as part of that, I feel like a lot of that comes from people just desperately wanting to return to normal. And so I wonder, Congressman, if you have a sense of any timeline in your mind of, if and when things will return to normal.
So I'm one of the people who desperately wants to return to normal.
I have a question.
Not just to get a haircut, but all the other things I love to do. And so many times of the day, I feel the same way. But here's what, we're not in lockdown just because one person, the governor of our state, decided that we have to be. In the days leading up to the lockdown in New Jersey and across the country, restaurant reservations were already down about 75%. Nobody was ordering people not to go out. We were just not going out because we don't want to die. We don't want to expose people we care about to a deadly disease. And to this day, if you ask New Jerseyans, do you agree with this? Yeah, I know there are people who are angry and upset about it. Some people are demonstrating, but the polls show over 80% of us, so obviously cuts across party lines, believe that this is the right thing to do because we value human life. And so the point I'm leading up to is that opening up is also not a decision that one person, the governor, is going to make. It's a decision that all of us are going to make together. And it's not going to happen on one day. We may have a day when the park's open. We may have a day when more businesses can do curbside pickup. We may have a day when meetings under 50 or something are allowed. But none of that is going to be real unless a lot of us decide personally that it is safe to go out, to go back to work, to go to school. And so the question, the right question is not when does that happen, but what must we do now so that we feel safe to do it? Because if it happened today, if the governor just said, forget about it, like we're going to reopen, we wouldn't reopen, right? Because we don't feel safe yet. And so what must we do so that more of us will feel safe? And that gets you back to, we need more testing, not just to people who have a fever, but anybody who wants to know they can safely go back to normal life. You need contact tracers so that if I test positive, they can go out and tell everybody I've been in contact with, and then we can gradually send most people back to something that looks like normal and have a system for those of us, hopefully not that many, who still need to be isolated for a while. We have that, we can, and we can do that. It's a huge task, but America has done big things before. The New Deal. We've mobilized our whole country to solve a problem. That's what we need to do. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you both. Our next question, I'm going to butcher your name, but comes from Prahans. Prahans, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Representative Mosky, for having these. My question relates to the business interruption insurance. I know some states have looked at, you know, a lot of policies do not have, and claims are getting denied. You know, they've looked at the federal level and the local level. Do you know if there are, you know, any bills or anything and where that stands? Because I know for businesses it would be very helpful beyond some of the programs today.
Yeah, I know. We've looked into that. That was one of the first questions that I asked. And we've approached the insurance companies. We've talked about doing something in legislation. It's complicated by the fact that if pandemic related harm was covered by all these business insurance, business interruption policies, the insurance companies, I think, do have a point that they would have completely gone under because this is so huge. So the solution could only have been, if that were the vehicle for getting relief to businesses, we would have needed the government to subsidize that system, if you see what I mean. Now that might have been a good idea, and I have colleagues in the House who are pushing that as an alternative to using the banks. Let's just use insurance companies and subsidize their business interruption plans so that they could actually make every whole. As I invested, there's another alternative on the table, which I think is interesting, and that's basically just using the tax system. So that's where we are. Companies, and we continue to have those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from, I'm sorry, before we get to Mary Lou, just a friendly reminder for anyone that does have any pressing questions, please just use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. As noted before, please just use your name, the town you're from, and contact information. This helps us if there's follow-up after the call, or if we don't get to your question on the call, it's easier for our staff to reach out to you. Our next question comes from Mary Lou. Mary Lou, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead with your question.
Okay. So my first question is relative to the post office and giving them some financial help. I've heard that there's a bill, something called a package tax, that concerns me because it will have a big impact on small businesses. And then if those fees are passed down to the consumer, this consumer right now, the base is 20% of them are unemployed. So that is a big concern of mine. So that's question one.
So very simple. I completely agree. I think that's stupid. Why should we increase a fee on a service that is already making money? The post office is not losing money on its delivery services. That's not where the problem is. So why should we saddle consumers, us, with greater costs? The problem is this pension burden, this very unnatural and I think unfair pension prepayment burden that we placed on the post office some 15 years ago. I don't know where this package tax thing is coming from. The going theory in Washington is that the president is very angry at Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, who also owns the Washington Post. Yes, we now have a country in which the owners of newspapers can be punished by the government for bad coverage. Something I've seen all my life in other countries, never thought I would see it here. So if that's the case, it would be pretty outrageous. But whatever the reasons, I think it's a dumb idea, and I would strongly resist it.
Yeah, I would rather see the post office not be open one of the days that it currently is. You still get enough service. To me, that would be a possible solution if that helps them economically.
We'll see. And like we have a divided government, and we do have to make compromises. And I have very strong opinions, which I'll always be straight with you guys about. But that doesn't mean that I can't make a compromise and swallow something at the end of the day that I don't think is ideal if I feel like it's going to get us something that is better and more important than what I'm giving up. But we'll have to see what those who are holding this up are demanding, and we'll have a negotiation.
And my other question is, I'm certainly grateful for what the PPP has given small businesses, and that's wonderful. However, it is only good for 8 weeks. The lockdown in New Jersey has been significant.
Yep.
And I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And while I am certainly concerned about everybody's safety, if you have an income and you can work from home, that is a situation that is much easier, while still difficult to deal with, than if you have a small business that is closed, if the person that you were employed by is no longer open and now you don't have an income. That kind of financial hardship that people are going through is very frightening. So I'm not suggesting that we should do things inappropriate, but as you had earlier stated, doing things in a safe manner, in stages, certainly I'm a real advocate of.
Yeah.
But the other issue here is because the lockdown is going on in New Jersey for so long, will there be any other kind of financial help that small businesses will get? Because 8 weeks is going to go by very quickly. And if businesses aren't open, now those people are still going to wind up on the unemployment lines.
Yeah, I hear you. You hit the nail on the head. The whole point of the lockdown was to try to buy time. Buy time for what? Buy time for a public health response that would make it safer for people to go back to work and school and all the other normal stuff. We were supposed to have used that time more efficiently than we did. And that's what we should be angry about. So now we're looking ahead to a point where the aid is probably going to expire, and it may still not be safe to completely open the economy. It may be safe to take small steps, and I hope we'll be able to do it, but not to completely open the economy. And some of the suggestions we've heard from the White House, they're pretty candid, and I'll give them that. are that they want to hold off on providing more relief, more aid for people, for businesses, for unemployed folks, because they want to force us to reopen. They can't order Phil Murphy or Governor Cuomo or any other governor to do it. But by withholding relief, they may feel like we have no choice. And that makes me angry. What we should be doing, as I've said again and again, is using this time to make it safer for people to go back as soon as possible, because we are going to go back. We have to. We can't do this forever. So when we go back gradually, step by step, person by person, family by family, business by business, I want us to be able to do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice the lives of thousands of more people in New Jersey. And on top of that, I don't want to have to do this again in the fall and in the winter, because that'll kill the economy in addition to killing a lot of innocent people.
Thank you very much for your response.
Thank you so much.
Following up on that, Tom, a frequently asked question that we are getting right now are, is there any updates on unemployment benefits for gig workers / independent contractors?
Yeah, so as you guys know, I'm sure, gig workers, self-employed people did not pay into the unemployment system, and so traditionally they didn't qualify for benefits. We changed that for the purpose of this pandemic so that they qualify for, in many cases, it'll be a minimum benefit, which in New Jersey is a little over $200 a week, but supplemented by $600 a week that the federal government is providing in this crisis. But because it was a completely new thing, the state, which administers the unemployment system, didn't quite know how to incorporate all of these self-employed people. Even to this day, if you apply, you will be denied. And what they say is, don't worry, just apply, give us your information. You'll be denied. It doesn't mean you're actually denied. And then we will return back to you eventually with notice of what you're going to be getting. So that was greatly delayed. We are now at a point where they are processing claims for the self-employed workers, but obviously later than we had hoped. And a lot of people still have not gotten their checks, who are entitled to those checks. This is where my office has been working around the clock, helping individual constituents figure out what's going on with their unemployment payments. And particularly, we've gotten a lot of people in this category, as you would imagine. What we are hearing from the state is that they are catching up. They are clearing out the backlog. I've definitely heard from a lot of constituents who had come to us with complaints that, yesterday or the day before, they got a call back or they got their check. Not everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but more than we were getting a week or two ago. So progress, but we still need a lot more.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Our next question comes from Erik Kent. Can you hear us?
Yes. Oh, let me in. Hi, Representative Malinowski.
You're good.
Hi, Erik.
I'm actually going to start my video in here. Hi.
Hey, good to see you.
Good. I'm from Montgomery Township. And my wife and I have a wedding business, a website called njwedding.com.
Mm-hmm.
So we represent engaged couples planning their weddings throughout the state, the wedding business community. And as you could understand, everything is kind of shut down.
Yeah.
So in speaking on behalf of the couples, when can couples expect to have a traditional wedding again in New Jersey with all their friends and relatives and the normal 150, 200 gathering?
Yeah. I can't give you a when responsibly, because number one, it's the decision of the state government, and it hasn't been made. And I think if I were the governor, I think I know what he would say, which is the date depends on the data. And, because we have to it has to be an objective decision based on when it's safe for people to do that. The good news is that the data is improving, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the call, in terms of hospital admissions and number of people who are very, very sick. The testing is not where it needs to be in the state of New Jersey, but I'm going to listen very closely to the governor's plan tomorrow. I think we are turning a corner there, and I'm going to be as annoying as I have to be to push that along. So that's all I can tell you. And in the meantime, our obligation to you, and here you are, you're a classic example of a small business that's really, by definition, hurt badly by this. Our obligation to you is to try to make it survivable. Have you applied for a PPP loan, by the way?
Yes.
You did, and has it come through?
Yes, it has.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
So again, hopefully we can extend that for you. And I know you'd rather have a flourishing business than to be asking for help. But it's, you also don't want to have a wedding right now, and not that people would come, right? But if they did, like they would be getting sick, and
Right.
nobody wants to be associated with that. So I would just say you're one of the, you're one of the people who is making sacrifices so that our fellow New Jerseyans and Americans can be healthy and safe. And we're grateful to you for being willing to make that sacrifice. And our promise is to try to make it survivable. So stay in touch with us, please, on this. I'd like to know how you're doing.
Well, thank you for your service and for helping along the contact tracing. That was the other part of the question, because as we know, it's a public health crisis first, and nobody wants to be in a room with people that are sick or have the potential of getting ill.
Yeah.
So we need to resolve this quickly, and the best way we can is how Governor Murphy and yourself and everyone involved can move it forward.
Good, and I hope there are a lot of weddings when we're done with this.
Yeah, reason to celebrate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Once again, for anyone that has a question, I know there were a few technical difficulties on my end throughout the call. I will leave the chat feature up for a few minutes after we end the call. So if you have any questions, please utilize that chat feature. It's very, very important, if it's after the call, that you please include some contact information as well as your name, so our office can get back in contact with you. And we will try our hardest to answer every single question that is submitted. So please, please, please use the chat feature. And once again, that's an apology on my end if we didn't get to your question here on the call. But without further ado, I'll turn it back over to the Congressman for closing remarks.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. Thanks to everybody for the really good questions. I think we covered pretty much all of the big issues that we're facing right now in Congress and in our communities. We are far from out of the woods, but I think we have demonstrated what Americans can do when we come together determined to defeat a common enemy. I think it can be quite inspiring. And if we can do this, we can do more. My commitment is to work as hard as I possibly can to make sure that every one of my constituents can benefit from the programs that we have created in the Congress to get us through this, and to keep fighting for policies and programs that are going to be beneficial, based on facts, based on science, not based on wishful thinking. We hope for the best, but we work and prepare as if it's going to be very, very hard. And I think if we do that 2 or 3, 4 months from now, we come out of this and look back on the sacrifices that we made and say, that was hard. We had serious losses, but it was worth it. And we showed again what Americans can do when we come together. So with that, I'm going to sign off, but we're going to keep on doing these. I want to be as accessible as I possibly can through this crisis and beyond. In addition to wishing that everybody on this call stay healthy and safe, I invite you to please stay in touch. Let us know how you're doing and how we can help. With that, I'm going to sign off.